title that I give this, it's going to be The Confusing Truth About Experience of God in what's called Paul's Fool's Speech in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So we're going to talk about experience of God. And that's something that, I'm a convert. I converted at the age of 18. And I had kind of an explosive experience of God, or at least that's what it seemed to be. And that had a real impact on my soul. And I remember coming here to Biola. I came in 1976. Wow, that's incredible. That's like 47 years ago. And I was a Talbot student. That's 43 years ago. And I remember sitting in a Talbot course on pneumatology. And in that class, we talked a lot about the filling of the Holy Spirit. We talked about, especially the text in Ephesians 3, where it talked about coming to know the height and the depth of love of God and to be filled with all the fullness of God. And I remember at that time in seminary, I began to really wonder, what does that all mean? Am I filled with the Spirit? I had a professor named Dr. Sosi. He's no longer here. He's with the Lord. But I remember feeling like talking to him saying, Dr. Sosi, are you filled with the Spirit? How do you get filled? How do you do that? And I think I did bring that up to him when he said, "Oh, John, that's a very deep question." Yeah, that's the question of my life. See, as you all know, Augustine said that we were made for God. And there's something about our heart that is restless until it's finally going to rest in God. And so so there's something about all of us that we long and hunger for this, but then there are confusions that begin to kind of develop. And so the confusion that developed for me was when I came to the Lord at 18, my who was to be my wife in high school, she led me to the Lord, and then we got married at the wise age of 19. I told my daughters if they marry at 19, there will be a homicide in La Mirada. But anyways, we married, and I was so on fire for the Lord. Something was going on in my soul. And of course, I edited all my friends, right? I would tell them, God is alive and you're going to hell. That's probably not the best way to draw them in. But that's what went on. But by the time I got to seminary, I was going to say cemetery, but it's seminary. Something changed. And something changed. And now I found that my prayer times were getting really dry. I found that even reading the scripture was like, God, Lord, this is, I couldn't tell the Lord this yet. I didn't know the Psalms yet. And so I would talk to myself. I would literally press the pause button on my quiet time, and I'd have a conversation with myself. And the conversation would be something, John, what is wrong with you? You are now in seminary, right? You lead Bible studies. You're becoming a little philosopher theologian. And I'm bored with reading the Bible, and my prayer time was dry. This began a real confusion. And because as my intellectual life was increasing, and it was going to increase because I was going to go on and get 3 masters and a doctorate, and I loved everything I was studying, from textual criticism to Greek to Old Testament studies, and then to philosophy. It was all wonderful. But as my intellectual life was increasing, I noticed my prayer life was decreasing. And I really didn't understand this. And so there were confusions that were starting to develop about experience of God. And I would hear other people talk about it. And I would hear some say, well, I experience the Lord all the time. In fact, that's the normal sign of growth, is you experience God all the time. And if you don't experience God all the time, then you should be doing something to experience God. And then I heard others say, I used to experience God, and I don't know if I am now. What's wrong? What's going on? And then I heard others say, I'm not sure, God, if we generally do experience God. I don't think we should seek this. I think we should just be faithful to the word and faithful to obedience and let that go. So there's a lot of issues here when I think of experience of God. That meant a lot to me at 18 when I had this expulsive experience of the love of God. And then something faded. So again, there's many things to say about it. And it turns out the history of the church has talked about this a lot. I'm going to just focus on a little piece that Paul's going to address in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And he's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that might help deal with the confusion, or they might help add to the confusion. But so I just want you to recall for a moment the context of 2 Corinthians. This is a very personal letter of Paul. This is one where Paul, he's really sharing personal things with the Corinthians. He had planted that church and had been away for a while, and now he's really concerned. You know, the church at Corinth is kind of like the church at Las Vegas. I mean, this is the crazy, wild church. This isn't like your typical synagogue of Jews who are very moralistic, who come to the Lord. This is a church filled with Greeks who are bringing in a lot of strange ideas, and they're doing a lot of strange things, right? I remember in the first letter, there's some guy running around saying, Jesus is accursed, and I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. So this is kind of weird. There's been some letters written back and forth, and now we come to the 2 Corinthians. And the concern Paul has, there's many of them, but one of them is with some individuals, he calls them super apostles, or these eminent apostles. We don't know the whole, he's not clear about this, but this starts in chapter 11. And there are these individuals who've come in, and they now are teaching things, and Paul is going to call them false teachers, false apostles, deceitful. Their end is going to be a bit of destruction, so he's concerned about these, but they have turned the Corinthians to themselves. And they're engaging in what it looks like from chapter 11, a lot of boasting. They're boasting about themselves, they're boasting about their life, and they're boasting about, it looks like, spiritual experiences. And in that discussion, at least as we try to put the letter together, it looks like they've been probably saying something like this: hey, we've had all these experiences of God. Did Paul have them? Did Paul ever talk to you about his experiences? No, he didn't, did he? Doesn't that tell you something? That maybe he's not the person you should be listening to. So notice the idea of religious experience has become now their way of authority. That they've had these experiences, or they've had something, and now the Corinthians are probably saying something like, wow, you're right. I can't remember Paul sharing any. Wow, and Paul wasn't a very eloquent speaker, right? He even says that about himself. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be following him. Paul has these Corinthians in his heart. He loves these folk. And he's one, and he realizes that their head is being turned by these false teachers, these individuals who call themselves super apostles, who claim to have these incredible experiences of God. And now Paul is going to have to write and defend himself. He doesn't like doing this. But now he's doing it. And so in chapter 11, he starts this thing that the commentators call the fool's speech, where he says, I'm going to have to say things that I would never like to say. I'm going to have to boast. You put me in a spot where I've never done this with you. And now Paul's going to do something very personal. He's actually going to share an experience that he had of God. And at least in public revelation, this is the only time that he has shared this experience. We know from Acts he had a number of experiences, of visions. And we also know in Galatians, he wants to make it clear that he did not receive the gospel from the people at Jerusalem, right? He didn't have to go to Peter and John to get it. He said, no, I got it directly from the Lord. And so he tells us in Galatians he went away to Arabia. We think he was in Arabia like 2 years. And he's probably receiving many revelations. And now in chapter 12, he's going to have to, he starts out, so if you have the scriptures, you can read them with me, but I'll read them for you. Let's start in verses 12, 1 to 4. He's going to say, hey, look, boasting is necessary. I've got to boast. I've never done this with you. When I came to you, he says, I came to you in weakness. I came to you just as I am. I want you to really be thinking of that through this whole thing. He says, I came to you just as I am, no more. But these other guys have been putting on airs, and so I guess I'm going to have to boast. So boasting is necessary, though he says it's not profitable. I'd rather not do it. But look, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about visions and revelations of the Lord, okay? I've had them. But he does something really weird here. He feels this is so strange for him, meaning he hadn't done this a lot. This was not his way of advancing his authority. And so he actually will talk in the third person. He doesn't even want to say it's me. He says, okay, I've got to boast. It's not profitable, but I'll share my vision. So I know a guy, I know a man. That's just weird, I know this guy, this man in Christ who 14 years ago, by the way, this is probably very loving and personal and wonderful for Paul. He remembers this. It happened 14 years ago, and he remembers it. So 14 years ago, now whether in the body, I do not know, or out of the body, I do not know, God knows, right? And that's kind of a weird thing. And he probably says that because probably some of the Corinthian, these false teachers who've come in or have a little bit of what we call a Gnostic tendency, that maybe the body's bad, and so you can only have an experience of God out of the body, right? Because in the body, this is sinful, so you have experiences out. And Paul wants to say, no, that's just a bunch of bunk, right? You can have experiences of God in the body. But he says, I don't know what this was. This is fascinating. Whether in the body, out of the body, I don't know. God knows. But such a man, right, whoever this guy was caught up, in the third heaven. Whoa. And I know such a man, right, it's himself. Whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know. God knows. He wants to say this again. So I have a feeling something was going on in Corinth, that these people are saying, we have had experiences of God out of the body. Right? And Paul wants to say, I just cut through that. But this man was caught up into paradise. And he heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak. Wow. Now, we don't get a lot of context about what the third heaven is. Well, we do know from the literature around there, like the book of Enoch and other things, that this third heaven seemed to be the abode of the righteous now. That's the way it was considered. The word paradise, we actually do get that in Revelation. Revelation 2, it says that the person who overcomes will have the right to eat from the tree of the leaves of healing in the paradise of God. And so whatever this paradise is, it has something to do with the very presence of God. So Paul literally has been caught up into the very presence of God. And notice, Paul does not think, he wants to make this clear, this is not because of my spirituality. This isn't because I prayed or I went on a week retreat. And the result of my going on a week retreat, I had an experience of God. He doesn't say that. He just says, I was caught up. This is a gift from God. This is something God has done. And he says he can't talk about it. He can't talk about it because he's in the very presence of God. And either the Lord doesn't allow him to speak of what he heard, or that it was such an ecstatic, incredible, ineffable experience that I can't even put in words. We don't know what it is. Of course, that's so opposite of these other guys, right? These other folk who've had experiences, they want to talk and talk and talk about it. Paul, he's amazing. I don't even want to talk about it. I've never talked to you about it before. That's amazing. And so notice verse 5 and 6. On behalf of such a man, I will boast, but on my own behalf, right, I am going to boast about it because it really happened. But on my own behalf, I don't want to. I don't want to sit here and talk about it. I'd rather talk to you about my weaknesses. That's amazing. For if I do wish to boast, I shall not be foolish, meaning I had these experiences. I could boast. But I shall be speaking the truth. They happened. But I refrain from this. And I did refrain from this when I was with you. Because I don't want you to credit me, kind of underline this about ministry. I don't want you to credit me with more than he sees in me or hears in me. Like I want you just to see this person here, what I am. That's how you can understand me. I don't have to share these experiences to try to assert my authority. Now, for Paul, this is an amazing experience. He treasured this. He probably had many of these. They're wonderful. When the ancient spiritual writers of the church read this, they kind of give this a name. They call this consolation. And they say that in our life, God gives these. Now, maybe you haven't been caught up into paradise, but maybe you've had times where the Lord is sweet, right? The Psalms talk about this, the Psalms of orientation, the praise Psalms. Those are the times, the seasons of life when God is close, he's sweet, things are good. Those are just wonderful times. For Paul, this was an incredible time. But here's something that's very interesting about, and here's what might be confusing about religious experiences. And it's this: these wonderful consolation experiences, get this, they don't deal with the potential spiritual arrogance that they actually help create. Wow, I want you to think about that. These wonderful experiences of God, they encourage the soul, but as the ancients kind of looked at this text, they said, but you know what's interesting? They don't purge and help us see what's going on inside. Look what Paul says, the next thing he says. And because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, now get this, and because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, there were many. For this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, to keep me from exalting myself. Wow, Paul knew that there was a temptation in him towards arrogance. He knew that. I mean, I can imagine Paul going to, if you know anything about Acts, if you go to maybe at the Jerusalem Council or one of the councils where Paul is going to attend, and there's Peter and James, and now he's having to contest things. I'm sure he would have liked to have said, hey guys, I tell you what, can I tell you some of my experiences of God? Peter, James, have you had any of these experiences? Peter, have you ever been caught up in paradise? Oh, no, that's right, Peter, you denied Jesus 3 times. That's right. No, you haven't. And so you want to tell me about the gospel? I see. Would you come up and tell me? But first, talk about the denials. And then I'll tell you about paradise. So, wow. So Paul knows this. He knows this tendency towards arrogance. And so he says that God gave him a thorn in the flesh. The idea of a thorn, right? It could be the Greek word, it could be like a stake, it could be a thorn, it could be a splinter, whatever it is. It's just something that it's relentless. It bothers you. You know, I do gardening with my wife now. I used to hate gardening, but I'm old, so I do gardening now. And I get thorns. We have 80 rose bushes in our backyard, and I get thorns all the time, and I hate these things. And you know when they hit a nerve, oh my gosh, when they hit a nerve, I want to get that thing out. Paul's got this, and this one's not going to come out. And so this thorn, right, this thorn is, it's to buffet, right? It says this has buffeted me. The idea of kind of beating with a fist, tormenting. Just as the first revelation was from God, so this one is from God too. See, what we're moving to is a second revelation, a second way of God revealing himself to us. And he says it's from God, but he's using emetaries. He says Satan's, but it could be his opponents. It could be literally demons are going to be the mediators of this. The source is from God. What's interesting, he doesn't tell us what the thorn is. So as you look in the history of the church, some of the early church fathers, they thought of this as Paul's opponents. The medievals, they kind of thought of this as lust, that was what this thorn was, and it wouldn't go away. When you get to the reformers, they thought of it as spiritual temptation. Contemporaries kind of think of it more as like ailments. Ken Birding has just written something about that. But here, most commentators say this. It's fascinating that Paul resists telling us the nature of the thorn. He doesn't tell us what it was, because it looks like he's going to give us a general principle, and he wants us to now think of what is our thorn. Have we ever had a thorn? Have we ever had something that's really bugged us? It's buffeted us, right? It's done something to us. Whatever it was, here's what it did to Paul. It humbled Paul. That's the issue. In fact, it might have been something where it might have been a personal sin. Whatever it was, it's something that it humiliates Paul. It makes him experience himself and realize, I'm not that much. So whatever that thing was, it's going to last a while. And it's got to be strong enough so that when Paul, whenever he is tempted to say, oh yeah, Peter, something catches his mind about himself and says, oh, Paul, there's nothing here either. There's nothing here either. So whatever it was powerful, that it would curb his arrogance. That's incredible. And so notice now Paul's response here in verse 8. Concerning this, I entreated the God 3 times, just kind of like the Lord Jesus. God, would you take this away? God, would you take this away? And you all know this verse. And God said to me, now God spoke to him. My grace is sufficient for you. Wow. My grace. Here we have a second kind of religious experience. But it's going to be with thorns. My grace. I'm going to be with you. Paul, I'm going to be with you. I'm not going to take this away. This will humble you, and I'll be with you in this. My grace is sufficient because power is perfected in weakness. Now, that power is perfected in weakness. That we can't get into the details here, but it's from this Greek word teleo, this idea of perfected or brought to an end. So Paul could be saying here that human power is brought to an end in your weakness. So you know what thorns do? Thorns are things that bug you. Trials. That's what they are. They're things that we struggle with, and they bring out the heart, and God, I don't want this. Crap. I don't like this. By the word crap, that's a technical Greek word from krepeomai, right? That's a joke. That's a joke. Yeah, it's a joke. But that's what trials do. And thorns, they bring out the expectations we have on God. God, I don't like this. And now we see ourselves. We see our weakness. We see what we really are. That's what's happening to Paul. He's seeing continually who he really is. And he wants this taken away. And it's okay to ask God to take it away. It's okay to. But God has said in this case, I'm not going to, because I'm going to bring an end to your power in your weakness, or probably what most say, it's God's power. In fact, later translations, texts called the Byzantine text, they actually put my in there. My power is perfected in your weakness. That's probably what the idea was. That God's power is completed. It's brought to its telos in our weaknesses. Wow. And so he says, therefore I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, distresses, persecutions, difficult. Wow, he's well content. Because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. My gosh. What an incredible thing that Paul has learned. And Paul has now come to see, I'm going to boast about these because these have really taken me to God in a way that the other ones, they actually could puff me up. Isn't that interesting? But the Lord gives us those things because he knows when we need that consolation. He knows when we need encouragement. But there's one thing about those consoling experiences that are just positive. You know what they don't do? They don't expose the heart. They don't deal with what's in the heart. See, these thorns are going to bring up what's in the heart. So I just want to kind of close with some of these thoughts for you. Just the first one is this. There are going to be experiences that you will have in life of consolation, just like Paul did. They may not be as strong ecstasy as that, but they might be. But they'll be consoling, they'll be encouraging, and those will be precious to you. They'll be precious, they'll encourage you, because God knows what you need. It's like, oh, God, that's so good. The second thing, just know that those experiences will not deal with the sins of the heart in this life. They won't do that. And so what God does is he's going to give you a second kind of experience of God. You can count on it. These will both be in your life because you'll need encouragement, and there'll be other times where he wants to expose the heart. And there'll be trials, there'll be thorns, the things that bug you. And because you know what this does? It purges us. It opens the heart. It does surgery. It exposes the sin. It says, and we say, God, I don't want this. I want my own way. And where's this going to take the believer? It's going to take the believer, oh, God, I need you. Oh, God, I need you. Oh, God, I'm a mess. And this opens our heart to him, to forgiveness, to his love, to him loving us right in the middle of that krapeomai. Right? This is John 15:5. Jesus is the vine. Right? Jesus is the vine. I'm not the vine. Jesus says, no, John, I'm the vine. You're the branch. You're going to have to learn to live in me. Because, John, that's where you're going to bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. So you know what these weaknesses do, these thorns? They bring us to that place. God, I can't do this. God, I can't handle this. Now, I'll just end with saying that not all believers do well with thorns. There's no guarantee that with a thorn you'll do well. There are some believers where they really struggle for a long time. The thorns seem to crush them. They can't take this. It's too much. I've been going through thorns these last couple years that have been overwhelming. I'm 67. I really thought that, it's going to get better and better, and it's, wow, I have experienced some of the worst thorns of my life these last years. And I have asked God, take it away. God, I can't take this. God, take it away. Oh, and when I think of these things, they just kind of open my soul to who I really am. So let me just say that trials and thorns, they can be terrible. They are terrible. I hate even teaching about this because there's this little fear in the back of my head saying, I don't want these. Don't give them to me. So don't talk them up too much, John. They can be terrible. And you have permission from God to ask God to take away these things, whether it be problems with people, problems going on in your marriage, problems going on in your own life, whatever's going on, you have the permission to ask, God, would you take this away? But here's what I just end with, is just be open. Just be open sometime in the middle of this. Because right now, I'm praying for some things really hard because they're really painful in my life. And as I was praying just even this morning, I just opened for a moment, and here's what this is where you can take a chance. Okay, Lord, if you don't answer this the way I want it to go, then what are you trying to do in my life? That's the question. That's the question that has to be turned in our prayer life. Because there's some things I just like, God, I can't take this. Oh, God, would you take this away? Oh, Lord. Because if it took it away, it would just open up some really wonderful things. But Lord, what might you do in this? He might have purposes to show us our weakness, to find us in there. I want you to think about this, about what it would be to have a ministry of weakness rather than a ministry of strength. A ministry of opening to the Lord in whatever he wants to do.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.